Southwest Fire Academy was established in 2015 as a response to the recognized need for quality, safe, and affordable fire and rescue training in Ontario. This is not your average fire college. SFA has high standards for their students, and it is their mission to teach and produce qualified, ambitious firefighters who are prepared to work hard to serve their communities. This is not a diploma mill. This is where you can learn strategic, aggressive firefighting from passionate, intelligent instructors who never forget why they were made to do this job. SFA is an accredited private career college that is regulated by the Ministry of Training, colleges, and universities, with a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Fire Marshal. This means that SFA is an approved training provider with the OFM, and the programs are recognized in Ontario. Check out their pre-service and expanding selection of course offerings at southwestfireacademy.ca. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 99 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. When we try and bring an idea forward and it is challenged, it is common to immediately jump to defend it and convince the naysayers. We forget that discussions and debates have at least two sides, and that it is incumbent on each to speak to the merits of their preference. Each party needs to be willing to change their opinion based on enough evidence, and each needs to bring enough evidence. This is the way we've always done it, and I just like it. Aren't valid positions. Victims don't care about what you prefer. They care about what is most effective. We need to be able to talk about things professionally without taking it personally. If you are met with crossed arms and arrogance, remember this. It is not your job to convince anyone of anything. It's your job to remove their ignorance, and it's their job to care. Beyond that, they can still say they don't like it, but they can't say they didn't know. Here's my chat with Gareth Lockhart.
Kick things off by telling me where you grew up. Tell me a bit about your family and we'll go from there.
Originally, I'm from Toronto, so my family's all from Ontario. I grew up there probably for the first half of my adolescence, and then my parents separated, as most boomer parents do, and then nowadays. And then we moved out here with my mom and my younger brother to BC. So still a lot of connections in Ontario. My dad still lives there. He's in Mississauga. We used to visit them probably every 6 times a year. So very well traveled going back and forth. Then I got the other half of the side of kind of having an adolescence with just a single parent and trying to manage that. So
what did your parents do?
My dad's been in real estate for his entire life, and then in some capacity or another, through the ups, the downs, back when you had to put the kids in the back of your car and bring people to open houses. And back in that day, when they were in Burlington, they actually owned a franchise. So they had realtors work for them and whatnot. But part of the impetus of divorce was stress, and so when the markets tanked, that was the Bre-X time of the year when all the economies were floundering, we were going through a true recession. That business went away, and so my dad, still being the entrepreneur that he is, he kept plugging along, but that was a little bit too much stress for the family. So yeah, then mom was she's always just been like kind of middle manager. She was a bank manager for 14, 15 years, and then when she moved out here, just the single parent thing got to her, and she never really did a lot. Well, let's put it this way. We moved a lot. So we moved a lot with mom around here. Yeah, she was just chasing those types of jobs. So
Brothers and sisters?
One full brother and then one half brother. Full brother with my obviously my mom and dad, and then a half brother who lives in Ontario with my dad and his new wife, wife of now 30 years. So we lived together until we were 20, and then everybody moves out. So
how was school for you, especially I guess with the moving around?
You always look at hindsight and how things build you and build character resilience. And I think that at the time it was a little bit difficult. We always managed to have little groups of friends and have people over and make your bubbles that you do. But you don't really realize, you get frustrated as a child because you don't want to move on to the next place. And unfortunately, the way that my mom's lifestyle was and what we had to do, that was just it. But she was very fortunate that she had a very, very supportive family out here. Her mom, or my grandma, who's now passed away, extremely supportive and was able to essentially house my mom anytime she needed to move anywhere, but it was a very complicated situation. So what really helped and what brought me to you today is, I think, the foundation of just secure living in one area when we finally moved to where we eventually settled just before I started high school, which, I mean, had we continued that trajectory of moving in every couple of years, the success that I've yielded since graduating from high school, I don't think that would have happened. So we were very fortunate that we settled down in a community just outside of Vancouver. Probably now it's about 165, 170,000 people, anywhere from about 30 minutes to a 2-hour commute into Vancouver, if you know Vancouver's highway struggles, much like yours, downtown. So yeah, I think that was really the start of it. Allowed us to kind of get that foundation, that back to that familial grounding that you kind of look forward to, especially when you're going into your post-secondary, but also high school. So,
how'd you find things academically?
I think I'd echo some of the sentiments of the other guests that you've had, where it seems like I'm no different than any other fireman, where I don't know if it's the type A, if it's the hands-on, it's the practical versus the theory, but I found high school just not challenging. And so what you'd find is my grades would be somewhere in the C pluses, the odd, and when we're saying odd, like 1B, always because of just the interest of it. It's great that it didn't reflect after in post-secondary, but yeah, I will say though, probably, and still to this day, the most important part of my life was that when I met my wife. So at the time, girlfriend in high school. So anything I'd have bad to say about my academics is irrelevant, considering that I met her there, and she's been the number one reason why I've been able to have any sort of modicum of success since then. So.
And how did post-secondary go then? You said it was a change.
I guess we should go back to high school, and I'm sure you'll ask it later, but I wanted to be a firefighter in high school. We can kind of touch on that a little bit, but that started in 2003, I believe it would have been. So yeah, well, no, sorry, it would have been 2001. But coming out of 2003, when I graduated, I was going to do some sort of real estate, and it was looking like it was going to be some sort of boring commercial real estate, whatever, following in the footsteps of dad. He has no company to take over. It was just an interest, and I've always been around it. My entire family, even on my mom's side, was in that. I had already dabbled in law in high school, so I did Law 12 Advanced, some of these other things. So I started going into it, and I enrolled in the local community college, which is now some sort of university today. So I go into this school, and I start doing my first year of criminology with the anticipation that I'll probably just finish a general arts degree. I lasted one semester. I finished my courses, and I just simply couldn't do it. And then my dad had a conversation with me, and he said, okay, well, you want to be a firefighter, but you say you want to do this whole real estate thing. How could you possibly do two things at 100% and then be 100% successful in either one of those? There's no way. And so at that point in time, I printed off one of the fire department's qualifications or requirements. I pasted it to the wall, and I said, here's what I need to do. Here's this pathway. So this is what we're going to do. So I ended up going to one of our local technical institutes and went into carpentry. Finished 2.5+ years there and got picked up by a company to do, ironically, not carpentry, but like account management and sales for construction, like a large construction company based out of basically Vancouver. They wanted that academic skill set with the practical knowledge. And then that kind of led me on to further things. Now, if you flash forward to today, my post-secondary has taken off. Like I just wrapped up my graduate studies in disaster and emergency management last year. I finished up a certificate in local government leadership through another university as well. Even though it's vocational, we've wrapped up our two. I don't know if you have I don't know what system you follow, but we have finished up our fire officer level 2 now through our institution, which is the Justice Institute. I think you can see that like vocationally you get inspired by certain things, where the C student in high school was just trying to get through so they can make it to the next level and started pursuing a career in the fire service. The fire service academic / practitioner is able to just pinpoint what he wants to learn now that he has that 13, 14 years under his belt. And I can say that just like some of your other guests, the academics take off when you truly enjoy the subject. So I went from a C to the dean's list, or in this case, like a 4.2 or 4.2 or 4.4 GPA. But given that it's just information you actually want to learn, and there's something that you can apply to, like as soon as you're done, you can apply it to your school. I didn't really need to know too much about Canadian history as a kid. Like they never taught me how to do my finances and budget. And while I think it's an awesome system that sets up for a great baseline to success, if you don't have the right vocational mindset going out of high school, then a lot of it's irrelevant. So I couldn't really focus.
What about sports and hobbies as a kid?
Yeah, again, with the moving around, we didn't get to do a lot. It was almost like a walk-on every single time. So I played baseball for a couple of years in elementary/high school. Walked onto our local lacrosse team for with like a B division in high school. Again, playing 2 years. I picked up jiu-jitsu after high school. Back when jiu-jitsu wasn't really a thing, it was. So what I did was I practiced what's called Kan Ryu jiu-jitsu, or it was a melding pot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu and what we really at that time in Canada made popular was judo, just because of Nicholas Gill and the Olympics. So it was a blend of that, and I ended up doing that for a couple of years until firefighting came along, and just how important the career was and the profession was to me. I put jiu-jitsu aside, so like most people do, just to not get injured during my probation, and I was never able to really go back. It wasn't part of my lifestyle at that point. Yeah, but it was a great time, and it definitely led me to a foundation of physical aptitude that allowed me to go into the physical or the fitness components of firefighting.
Was it a big shift for you then to get fit for firefighting?
Yeah, so like some kids, you get out of high school and the world's your oyster. Beer's cheap. All your friends want to party. So I gained about 40 pounds. I was about my heaviest right out of high school. I was slow. I slogged through it. Yeah, at some point in time, I just looked in the mirror and I said, like I know what the physical aptitude tests are. I think I flunked out of a volunteer one just after high school because I simply just wasn't fit enough. And then I started curtailing my fitness directly into what basically training in context. If I'm going to go and be tested on a fire combat challenge, what do we do in that combat challenge? Okay, well, we're running stairs. So what am I going to do? I'm going to run stairs. Okay, well, we have a hose pack. So what am I going to do? Oh, well, I'm going to go grab a sandbag and I'm going to run the stairs with a sandbag. Okay, well, I know I need cardio. This big fella, he needs to start running. So now we start running. And it was just a slow trot where the good news was that my body was strong enough because I kept weightlifting through high school. But the cardiovascular side of things took a hit because you're just sitting around as a high school student or a graduate of high school. I'm drinking and eating and just having a good time.
In BC, you definitely had the landscape around you to train.
Yeah, I did. I used to actually live on literally like a side of a mountain. And it's cool because to this day, I can still revisit the same exact community and run exactly the same trails. And I remember it was like a great elevation game, probably I think we're thinking like 350 to 400 meters within the span of, maybe 2.5 to 3 kilometers. I remember starting that my first day, just trying to get back into shape, and you'd walk it. And then the next day, in a couple of months, you'd run a section, and then you'd walk the rest. And then you'd run a couple sections and you'd walk. And then at the end of the day, well, after I got hired, you're running the whole thing and doing a loop. And it's really, I wouldn't say necessarily a warm up, but you can see the evolution of your fitness and that topography in the areas that we live in, whether it's I lived right by an inlet, so right on the ocean, but right up against a mountain. So you had everything at your disposal, and it was free. And for somebody that didn't have a lot of money coming out of high school, especially as my background, and just trying to save enough money for post-secondary, the pursuit of being a firefighter, the using nature to your best advantage was good because it's always out there for you. You just need a good pair of shoes and the willingness to get out.
And then CrossFit sort of came into the picture for you?
I did try it back in the day when it was simply just the WOD of the day, where the CrossFit used to post just some random, or they say random, but they say it's with intent, some workout. And so a friend of mine at the gym said, yeah, you should just give this a try. Today we're just doing 5 deadlifts. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm fat. And that's not going to cut it for me. So I did the one day and I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. You flash forward into after I'm hired, probably 2011, 2012. Yeah, I joined the local gym. Got pretty decent at it. No CrossFit games in my future, but just pretty good in the region. And then I ended up helping a colleague of mine open a gym in the local area. And that ended up coaching, which now coaching, again, hindsight being what it was, it really assisted with firefighting too, which is neat. So you get both the ability to speak in front of people, the ability to lead a group, but also that fitness aspect where you can now resonate with the people that you're working with and just show that there's some competency. It was an awesome time. I have children now. I don't have that kind of time. I'm not the type of guy that brings his kids to the gym, puts them on an iPad like my 7 3-year-olds. They don't have tablets. They don't have phones. They've never sat in a corner of a gym watching dad work out. We have a gym at home and they can come in there with us, but it also allows them to play in the yard or in the back alley that we have here. And they can, that's how we integrate it, our fitness into their lifestyles. And we then go into their fitness and into their lifestyles. For functional movements and just the grassroots style of CrossFit, I still highly recommend it to most firefighters. It's just a matter of making sure that you have good mentors around you so they don't push you into doing things that you don't need to do.
And the volume.
It depends too, right? Like, I mean, you build up to the volume. I just don't want my guys doing handstand walks for no reason. If I could tell anybody, any firefighter starting their very first day, and this is from coaching hundreds of athletes, from 13-year-old girls to 80-year-old men, what CrossFit allowed people to do is get people out of a doorway, if that makes sense. So any fitness that can be done solely in a doorway, it's probably going to lead to injury. Something where if you're just deadlifting, if you're just anchored to a bar, if you're just trying to do a pull-up, if you're just doing a push-up, and everything is in exactly the same spot, that's where the injuries happen. So when I can get my firefighters to say, hey, you don't need to do a snatch, but what you really could do is a power clean. There's something where you have violent hip extension, something where you're still using your upper body and your lower body, doing a front squat, putting your weight slightly off center, somewhere that you're more vulnerable, somewhere that you're going to be doing almost all of your lifting off of the front rack position. There's definitely an application for the firefighter. It's just a matter of how far you want to go. Unfortunately, being those type A mentality, when they get into those gyms or they get into that environment, the ring muscle ups, and I was guilty, the handstand walks or the handstand push-ups, it does get sexy because you want to now compete. But for foundational exercises, foundational movements, I can't think of anything better. It's just a matter of tempering expectations and making sure that it's more job specific.
Are you still running and hiking?
Yeah, so a lot of running and hiking. I found that after jiu-jitsu and CrossFit, I needed something that, again, it was free, it was local, and it didn't impact our family life. And as you said, with just how BC is built out here, there's so many opportunities to run so many different topographies. So I took up trail running a few years ago, and that's just led me to other types of races. And I say races because I'll join events that are already scheduled, but the only person I'm racing is me. I just find it nice to get out into nature. And it's almost like that now it's more of a health and wellness, mental wellness trip for me. So like yesterday I did a 12K run. I think it was about an hour and 1 minute, but it was all intuitive. So all my running is intuitive. It's just getting out the door, setting a track and going. There's no designs on pace. There's no designs on distance. It's just more about getting out there and hitting the ground. Typically, my wife hates it. I either don't listen to anything and I'm super quiet, or I'll listen to a podcast and she's listening to 90s pop music and whatever else that's going on. I can't. So I use it really just as almost like a meditation while running.
That's great that you guys can get out and do things together.
Oh, yeah. She's fitter than me, but pound for pound, way stronger, way fitter. She loves athletics. She's a provincial level rugby player. Small lady, but very, very strong and fast. So yeah, shamed me in CrossFit too when she started, and finished 300th in Western Canada without ever doing a single day of anything. So, but she doesn't do it anymore. But yeah, no, she's awesome. So again, we talk about academics and her being my biggest support, but even fitness, she doesn't say she doesn't want me to be fat, but I definitely try not to be for her. So I want to stay in shape, not only for her and for the kids. And every time that she's going out the door, whether it's 5 o'clock in the morning or doing it at 7 at night, that's a pretty good push to at least do something.
With these mental and physical shifts along the way, did you have guides and mentors that sort of were helping you, or did you come to a lot of this on your own?
It's kind of interesting. So we didn't talk about the high school part, but nerdy as it is, as cliche as it is. So I wanted to become a firefighter after 9/11. So I was in grade 10, and just like anybody else, I wake up with a phone call from my friend, and he says, Gareth, you need to turn on the news. And I said, oh, he's calling me. I think it was 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember what time. Definitely before school. He said, well, I'm like, okay, well, what channel? He says, every channel. And as we all know now, that he was right. So I flip on the channel, and sure enough, we see events unfolding. Our school, I mean, we're pretty far away from where the incident occurred, but we still had to go about our day. I got to school, and now school's pretty much stopped in its tracks. Everybody's watching. We had these old tube TVs in the hallways. See, I'm trying to date myself to make people think I'm really old, but like I said, the cliche, kind of nerdy, but the first thing I saw, or one of the first things I thought was, wow, look at all these first responders going in while everybody's running out. And I know when it comes out of my mouth, that it sounds cliche, but I truly felt, and I thought, okay, that's what I need to do. How do I get to that point? Fortunately, my grade 12 year, there was a career prep program. So what we have up in or here in BC is the ability to take our post-secondary credits, and we're required 100 hours of volunteer time within a vocation or a setting that is kind of specific to something that we want to potentially do in the future. Now, I was fortunate that I had two options. We have the RCMP out here, and they have a boot camp. We call it Fraser Valley. It's about 2 hours outside of Vancouver on a good day. And you can go for a week and you essentially go through a junior cadet police camp. So I'd signed up for that. And I thought, first responder, that's it. I have no, and just to backtrack, I have zero first responders in my direct or immediate family, no firefighters, no police. My grandfather was in World War II, but that is it. I mean, not that is it. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. But anyways, yeah, so nothing. So I sign up for it. A week before it starts, my guidance counselor says, you know what, my wife works in administration in one of the bigger departments in our province downtown. Would you like to do this? It's a week-long program as well, almost mirroring what the RCMP one is doing, but it's fire. So I said, well, yeah, see ya, police. I'm going in, go into fire. So when you ask about mentorship, what I got from those 5 days with that department in their career prep program or the recruit program, and they weren't hiring out of it. It was simply just for high school kids. That was almost like that without having an individual, like a human mentor, but having a 5-day exploratory program for firefighting and figuring it out. That was the first step. That was the one that said, okay, you know what? I've had a little taste. I mean, we're not going on medical calls. We're not going to burning buildings. We're putting on gear. We're doing a quick little CPR course. We're doing a couple company inspections, but I can start kind of figuring out what the lifestyle is going to be like and what the day-to-day operations are without being in an ideal H atmosphere. So it was enough to get me to go. If for some reason the dude ever listens to this, because you never know who listens to podcasts and then very specific episodes. There was a guy though. I finished this program up. There's no A or B or C's. There's no pass or fail. You go and it's like summer camp. 3 months pass by and I'm working at a gas station in my town that we live in. One of the gentlemen that is doing this program, he recognizes me behind the till. And he says, hey, you were in the high school work experience program. And I said, yep. Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate it. I recognize you. I remember you. I don't know his name. Can't remember his name to this day. And he says, so what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm working. He's like, no, like, what are you doing to become a firefighter? Like, well, I'm still in high school. I mean, I think, yeah, I was in grade 12 or I just graduated. I'm like, well, I'm 17, 18 years old. I'm like, I'm just trying to figure it all out. He's like, well, yeah, but it's really hard to get in. He's like, every day somebody is trying to get hired and somebody is working to get that job. He's like, you need to be doing something every day. And this is just over the counter at the gas station. And then he said something like, so for instance, you're going to go to a written exam. Are you studying for that written exam? Because if you're not studying now, the other guys are. And so that guy, he was the one. So weird mentor. I've only ever seen him once ever before. Again, at that gas station when I was 17 or 18 years old. Flash forward, I'm 38, so 20 years ago. That guy was the first person that I thought, shit, this is going to take a lot of effort. I need to put it in. I've never put this much effort into anything in my life, and I really need to be dialed in. And that guy gets all the credit for me to start that path of how to do it on the fire service. My wife is the one that gets all the credit for me getting hired because she's the one that made sure I did shit. But that guy. So I hope he listens to it one day. He remembers because he's like it would have been 2002 or 2003. But what a kick in the teeth of some guy who's already got the job that you want saying you're not doing anything and you need to start doing something. So that was the first mentor. So again, nobody in the fire service. One of my best friends, his dad was a firefighter, and he was able to give me a couple hall tours and some idea on how to get into the service. And probably one of the sweetest of sweethearts. Guy's awesome. He's retired. He actually retired 6 months after I got hired. And he and I have done some side jobs together now in the last 2 or 3 years in a different aspect of our careers. That was more of just a friend's dad helping out. Yeah, I guess if we flash forward to the current department, the one that I'm in, been in for 14 years, the current one, we're a little bit slow on the uptake. Our department only became career composite in 2006. So when I got hired in 2010, we had a lot of people that were still trying to find their way in their own position. Everybody was hitting the ground, like basically jumping on a moving train. Your officers are trying to figure out how to be officers. Your most senior firefighters are trying to figure out how to be acting officers. And then your junior firefighters or your senior firefighter in the back of the truck, they're trying to figure out how to mentor or take control or care for the probationary firefighter. So me. everybody's so focused on doing a job that they don't know how to do. And I mean that in the most respectful way, that there was no time for mentorship, but there was no formal skill sets within the department that anybody was an expert in. Now we have experts in HVAC and plumbing and general contractors and that aspect, business. Some were business owner, very like good, successful businesses, but there was no forceful entry guy. There was no leadership. There was no, every department has a couple leadership guys. There's no leadership guy. There was no fire dynamic / fire behavior guy. So when it came to that, my mentors, and to this day, some of my best friends in our job were mentors for being a dad and being a husband. I've learned so much from those guys on how to just be a good human outside of the job. I just found my own way for the fire service. And then later on in my career, or actually, no, sorry, a year after getting hired, I needed, like you said, that mentorship within the fire service itself. And so I ended up joining a private company that provides, let's just say, like rescue services for industry. So teaching, consulting, and standby rescue services. And so I've been doing that for just over 12 years. And that's kind of where I found like piecemeal mentorship through the fire service. So finding those subject matter experts in technical rescue, in fire behavior, in auto extrication. That's that. So really a culmination of a lot of people kind of doing a lot of work for one person.
What other jobs did you do before you ended up switching over to fire?
Yeah, so primarily just construction. So I started with BCIT. I then went into the construction consulting / like project management account management position, which led me into the ability to go into the Justice Institute to do my 1001 program. I had a great boss, great employer who allowed me to go for 3 months of leave, gave me holiday pay to go attend, because it's about I don't know what it is now, but it was about $8,000 or $9,000 out of your pocket. I think it was 3 months, 5 to 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hour days. So when I came back, that same gentleman said, okay, well, you've been here for 2 years or whatever it was, a year and a half, 2 years. What do you need next? So there's a mentor for you. Somebody that says that they knew all along I was never going to be there for long. They knew that I wanted to be a firefighter. They sent me off to do firefighting. And then when they bring me back, the first thing I ask is, what do you need next for firefighting? And I've got a good little line that guy gave me that I still, to this day, being sometimes arrogant, I always remember, but I'll say it later. But so I said, well, I need a class, like out here, it's a class 3 driver's license. So, and like a dual axle with air brake endorsement. So, okay, well, we've got 20 trucks. So what you're going to do is you're going to shadow our drivers and you're going to drive those trucks. So I shadowed, even though it was the same business, I started driving. And it was a unique opportunity because it was the Vancouver Olympics at that time too, or building up to it. So it wasn't 2010, it was about 2008. And so I was able to drive all these flat decks, these HIABs, these Stingers, stiff boom cranes, mobile forklifts in and around the greater Vancouver area or Metro Vancouver during construction. So what an awesome time to build that experience. Once that was done, the goal was achieved, the license was had. I moved on to one of my clients who again said, hey, how's the pursuit going? And I haven't even applied for a fire department yet. I said, oh, it's good. Here's some of the boxes that I've been checking. And he said, okay, well, why don't you come work for me back into construction, get your hands on your practical skill sets back up so you're ready to go for school. So again, kind of like a mentor, somebody that believes in you, but not necessarily fire related. And so I ended up doing, it's hard to explain, but I was basically a carpenter for a small boutique like roofing company. So like a 2-man job where we would just do one-off gigs and I would just frame and form and do things that they needed to do. So basically from high school on, it was construction sales and consulting. It was driving, it was carpentry back again, then into the job as it is today.
Did you look into volunteer fire?
A year before the Justice Institute, I did apply to be a volunteer in the town that I was living, that's the problem. So I applied to be a volunteer in the first one that came up in the vicinity of where I was living. So I applied for a department. I was one single address number off of their border, and they said no. So I put the application in. I went to the fire hall. The captain showed me the map on the wall. He said, oh, I don't know if HR is going to pass this because here's your house. Here's our border. Literally one single digit off. I could run to the fire hall and I think it was like maybe 35 to 45 seconds. And so they said no. But then the next year during my recruit program, so that those 3 months, I reapplied because I had moved into their area, and sure enough, I became a volunteer firefighter. So in that organization, it was a composite department with a volunteer firefighter association. So that's what they called themselves. They weren't paid on call. There was some compensation for going to calls, but there was but then you weren't compensated for every second practice. You were only compensated 1 hour after the first call. And they were all, again, trying to find their way. Difficult situation in the sense that they don't get calls. The municipality is very slow. And for somebody that's trying to get into the service, it didn't really give me a lot of hands-on, but what it did most importantly was get my foot in the door. It was on the resume. I was in the environment. I was able to do a lot of computer module courses or classes that just added to some of my knowledge that would later on help me with those written exams that other municipalities would be requiring. But when it came to experience, it was a difficult time because the majority of the volunteers were also trying to get hired. A significant portion of them hadn't been, and they probably either weren't going to, or they were only going to get hired specifically in that department. So the mentorship there was a little bit few and far between because there was no focus, there was no guidance or leadership. They didn't know the sizes of the hose or the lengths on the trucks. They were very disinterested in practice nights. You couldn't come in on your days off and put the gear on and crawl around and practice. While it was definitely the impetus to me being hired in the current department that I'm at, which is significant value, other than being in the culture and having a little bit of resources on those computers, it was a year not wasted, but not gained. Let's put it that way. And it wasn't somewhere that I was going to apply anyways. I loved the town, but I needed to be somewhere that was it had to spark that desire that I had back in high school. It had to be, you're going to do stuff and you're going to do stuff regularly. And I'm not the type to sit around. I can't. So yeah, anyways, great experience in the sense that it got on the resume and that they believed in me at that time. And that I appreciate the fact that I was able to be there for that 1 year. So 1 year volunteer as I was applying for other departments.
How long did it take you then overall from starting to try to getting on full time?
Kind of like one of those like success overnight stories where it took me 6 years to get the resume together, but then only 1 year to get hired. Where the competition or a friend or a colleague or a peer that's also applying might see that I was fortunate to get hired within a year after fire school. It was 6 or 7 years in the making to make sure that a resume was and the experience, my age was ready. So at the age of 24, I was fortunate to be hired in a fire department, and again, undergoing a significant amount of growth. We're based roughly 45 minutes outside of Vancouver. Again, on a bad day, 2 hours outside of the major metropolitan city. At that time, I was, again, humbled with being able to choose between two different departments, one big city department that I think has a significant amount of value that would have definitely taken my career on a completely different path with less opportunity for some of the union things that I've been able to achieve and accomplish, but also giving me a little bit more hands-on in terms of call volume. Now, again, I mean, that call volume is reflective of what shift you're at, what hall you're at, and type of calls that they typically go to. Like now we know about 80% medical calls. But then in theory, my dream department was always going to be a suburban department, somewhere that I felt a connection to the city, that I knew most of the members, that I could definitely foster more than just friendships, but feel like it's a family where you know almost everybody's name and you work with almost everybody through your career. It's kind of what I wanted. And I don't know if it's like the TV version, but I wanted that TV version where I haven't worked with a guy for 5 years, but then we worked together for 2. But I've known him ever since that first time. And so I picked the suburban department, which is the one that I've been at with now. And it's been a fun, wild ride.
So walk me through the recruitment process now.
For mine, they'd achieved through, let's call it political action in some aspect or another, the growth of the fire department through 4 career halls essentially in 4 years. The difficulty that occurred was that those first 3 hires, they were all understaffed. So where our organizational bodies, without naming any of the acronyms, they'll tell you that it's roughly around 22 firefighters per hall. They started hiring 16. So I was going into a fire department that was already kind of understaffed, and they were hiring 16. A very unique process in the sense that they were going to, for the first time ever, hire external candidates. So what they did was they split their hire into 2. And they hired 8 from within, and those people, while still part of our competition, still going through the testing, they were going to be in their own kind of group, so to speak. Not that I would know until hindsight, being a hired member later on. And then they would have the rest of the other 8 hired externally. So we, just like any other department, I guess it's changed a little bit since, but I think at the time you still required 30 post-secondary credits or 2 years trade equivalency. You still required your 1001. So we went through, and then you have your resume builders, whatever else sets you apart from the pack. We went through your fire knowledge tests, your written exam, a ergometrics or personality situational based exam with video scenarios and mechanical aptitude / mathematical questions. And then we did a 3-day ride along with crews and then an interview. Now, everybody loves hearing about ride-alongs, and everybody loves them. Well, we've had, I think, eight or nine hires in my 14 years, and we've never, ever done one again. So now we have a new administration. We have some excellent leadership in our department now coming through. I think that eventually we're going to be going back to that because they realize the importance of it. But that was it. So yeah, so a few written exams, 3 days of ride-alongs with the crews. Super fortunate on my last day of ride-alongs. Hit it off with that crew at the time, and I was able to stay past shift change with them. So that led to like one of my first invasive calls, even though it was mostly hands off. But it was an excellent experience, and I never thought I'd get hired in the sense that I was never confident about getting hired because there's so many great candidates out there. But it definitely left me with a great feeling when I closed the door of the car and kind of took and drove home. So, but unique, just unique, and super unique coming in from the outside into a department that had never hired external candidates.
What was the academy recruit class experience like?
Now that I know where they should be and where it was, not great. It was more of an onboarding just for the department in itself. So your human resources meetings, a meeting with the local or the union that you would be a part of, some basic drills just to kind of get you saying and moving with the same vernacular. But at the time, there was really no established how or why as to what the fire department did. So nothing about how to stretch a line, nothing about why we do this fire attack, or here's the method of ladder raise that we use. Nothing in that formal aspect, because again, as a new fire department in the sense of, yeah, they were 30 or whatever, 50, 60 years old as a volunteer or a paid on call department. Really nobody hitting the ground running with that. I don't want to use the word incorrectly, but at that professional side where everything has to now be dialed in because we're now doing 6 to 9 minute responses and we're here every day. At that time, nobody had taken on those roles or opportunities to start directing, again, not professionalism side, but the professional side. So I think it was 2 weeks of onboarding and just a couple little dotting I's and crossing T's. Nothing to do with invasive training that we have now. Now what we do is we run an 8-week recruit program, and we cover all of their basic skill sets they need before they get to the fire halls. And then what we do is we just do our six, I think it's like a 3, 6, 9, and 12-month review. But rather than checking off the boxes of those individual skill sets of the candidate to make sure that they've done every step correctly on the company level, now we can kind of just integrate them more into the flow of regular training versus having to just have a couple guys in turnout gear standing around watching somebody do it and kind of half performing because they don't want to implicate the guy that's supposed to be performing. So now we have an 8-week program of actual invasive training versus what it was, which was a 2-week onboarding.
Speaking of integrating, how was it for you and the other guys coming in as the first external hires?
It was a mixed bag. So a mixed bag in the sense that it depended on who you were and where you were and who you were with. So for me, I had a really good crew. The captain that I had during my probation, still one of my most favorite people in the fire service in general. I'm fortunate to be at the same hall as him now. He's now our temporary training officer. Just a great human being. Absolutely crazy as F, but because I want him to listen to this and know this, but an amazing human being. And again, even though you asked about that, like being outside versus inside, and I think that narrative's now gone, which is pretty cool. But I had a senior firefighter who was our most senior actor. So a lot of the times he wasn't there. And also he's just, like I said, moving train. He was just trying to figure out how he was going to do it. My junior firefighter, who was 6 months, we were both the 2 youngest people they'd ever hired at the time. He's just trying to figure out how to be the only guy in the back. Because at that time, I would say, I think it was 35% of the time we were running 3-man engine companies. So here's a guy that went from 3-man engine companies to now definitely having a 4th guy, but not knowing how to manage a 4th guy and managing a 4th guy that has no continuity to the operations within the department. But he had a good attitude and he's our super hard worker. And we were both on the same page. The issues that occur, you would either be with a crew that thought that you should know everything because you are the one that just came out of the fire school, or you're the one that just went through the hire. You're the one that's supposed to know modern fire dynamics of that day. You're supposed to be the one that knows the latest and greatest how to force a door. And then they would look to you with that. And it wasn't, some of it's respect for just being the new student. And now they're just trying to make sure that you get the experience. There is the other side. You don't know anything. If you demonstrate the skill set that's beyond what they're either capable of or knew about, then now you're titled as like a know-it-all. So it was interesting. It ebbed and flowed depending on what crew you had, because you'd have people that were like looking for the new person to come in, that fresh breath. They're like, oh, thanks. It's not just our department's way anymore. I can now ask this new kid. or it's who's this new kid? They shouldn't be doing what they know. And so I think we're definitely beyond that point now. Not with me as an individual. I mean, just as an organization. But that was difficult. Yeah, every once in a while there was a paid on call member that was there. Maybe you'd see them on a call, and they definitely just didn't like the fact that you went out externally. Now, I wouldn't say there was no hazing, there was no bullying, there was no poor language. This is just a vibe and complaints. And we were also going through an interesting transition time. So because they were taking all of this staff out of their paid on call, the union had agreed to allow for a transition so that, because typically your union members in Canada, for the most part, don't, as they call them, two-hat. Like your union members won't be responding as volunteers, especially. Now, maybe like they've got a cabin or a cottage up north and they want to be part of the volunteer thing when they're up there. Totally fine. Nobody really cares. But certainly not in your own department. It just doesn't happen. Well, they had a transitional period where they allowed, because they just took essentially 16 times 3 of their members plus another 8 out of their paid on call. Now you're assuming that they're taking some of the best people that they have or the most experienced. The issue was that they were also allowing them to respond as paid on call members. Now we have zones in our district. We are 316 square kilometers. We are now 160,000 people. And at the time we were about 115. So 50,000 person growth almost within the last 14 years. But a lot of the area is uncovered. And it is covered by paid-on-call fire halls. And at that time, it would not be unlikely that a paid-on-call truck could beat those career engines to a call. The issue was that we had members on those trucks that were career members standing down career trucks because they were already there. And then the career truck wouldn't make it. Where it hurt me as an individual was that my hire was hired in April, and we were pushed off because council/mayor tried to put a stop to our entire hiring. And I didn't actually start until July. So we were supposed to start in April and July. So what I come into as a fire department or a new member, someone, a 24-year-old who's banked his entire post-secondary professional, whatever you want to call it, like career path to being a firefighter, who's now chosen this department over another more established department where I was never going anywhere but up over a career. I'm now in a department where I have my own members standing my truck down that the council or mayor at the time didn't want. And now I'm thinking, well, if I'm not going to calls and I have my own members also preventing us from going to calls, what are we doing here? Like, that ruffled me a little bit. I had to ask some hard questions to some people. Some gave some amazing answers and some perspective about their community and where they came from and how long they've been there and how they weren't ready to give it up and that they wanted to make sure that their neighbors are safe because it's not a protected area and this and that. We're well past that time now, but it's super, super difficult for especially those 8 people coming in from outside where we have nowhere else to go. Like, we moved there. Like, it was part of the requirements. We had to move to it. But if you already live there and you got hired internally, you're not going anywhere. It was very difficult. As with anything, hindsight being what it is, what a great experience to learn the dynamics of the fire service, so that if I've got to go talk to Scott in Ontario, or I've got to go to Alberta and talk to somebody, or if we're just teaching a class and somebody's wondering about the integration of volunteers to career or the transfer or the creation of a composite department and how do we go about it, you'll never, ever learn more than being in that situation. Hindsight being what it is, it was a fantastic opportunity to learn the dynamics of the fire service in such a unique and interpersonal way. But it was difficult.
And speaking of which, you got involved at the union pretty quickly.
I was very fortunate to have I guess you could call it like the trust of the leadership of the day with our president. He identified me in my first/second year on the job to assist with that political action that we just talked about. So taking over from what had just occurred over the last 4 years, there was a lull where they weren't really doing anything. And he wanted something that could articulate academically and show well to, like, let's call it the local government. So what we call like your mayor and council here. Yeah, I was able to go to Ottawa and utilize some of the training through our national union or organization and try to get my feet wet into that. And then participate on a local level for our organization to help further that, essentially the safety factor within our community, making sure that we were meeting the metrics that we needed to as a fire service that at the time, even through our initial hirings, were still underserved because they weren't hiring enough people. And we weren't making like what we would call like our occupational health and safety mandates, if you want to say that provincially. Like, so we call it Work Safe BC, but essentially that's your provincial body for occupational health and safety regulations. We just weren't making it. There's the ones that we were making that we require a certain amount of firefighters for making entry. We didn't have those response times, training. What we needed to do is we needed to find people that could articulate those needs to council, and a council that had already greenlit the hiring of 16 times 4 firefighters over 4 or 5 years. So that, which is a huge ask. It's a massive burden to a community. Now you can talk about the intrinsic value of the fire service. You can talk about the realistic and real life value of saving a home or a person. But at the same time, most people think that they're never going to have to call 911. But every single person who owns a home within this municipality is going to have to pay a tax bill. And so you need a really good fire chief and administration, and or a really good organization of firefighters to articulate and sell that idea of intrinsic value to the community. And so that president was trustworthy enough in me to allow me to take on some of that responsibility.
When did you start to become aware of other mediums where you could gather information about skills and approach to the job practically?
What I started with was that private company that I worked for. So I was picking brains of people that were in the service for 15, 20 years. And I say the career service only because, like, just where I'm living, and as you know, in Canada, we're not as spread out as the United States. We don't have that as much overlap or Venn diagram of volunteer / paid on call / composite / career departments. We pretty much only are in our, like, even though we have a lot of volunteer places, we only really integrate career wise, like, so composite or fully staffed. And so that third party company that I started working for, it was owned by ex-fire chiefs. It was the lead technicians, instructors, et cetera, were 15, 20-year firefighters / acting officers / lieutenants or lieutenants and captains. So that's where I started getting my information, was just through grassroots of conversation and having a few people that are so passionate about their topic that they just want to get that word out to as many people as possible. So, because it's all free. If Scott comes and tells me about the latest from UL, you're telling me because you're passionate, not because you're getting paid for it. And I think that's super neat within the fire service, is that all this information is, for the most part, free. And so I started finding all of these people, and then I started just putting this information together. To go more on a tangent, the biggest aha moments and what will lead into for some of the talk about search was COVID. I loved COVID. Sorry, like, I had it twice. I lost taste for a week. Like, I had headaches. Like, I felt like garbage. My wife got it. But man, what a time in our lives to get all of these webinars and podcasts out. You were getting people, subject matter experts from all over North America, for like $10 on your computer screen. I have never seen the fire service move that quickly, so fast. I think that a lot of, like, what we're doing here today is owed to that small portion in time where people needed to find ways to reach out to others. And it really expanded the way that we learn and that we can communicate. Unreal. Like, and I'll never go back and say it was a bad time. Like, I was the very first crew in our city that got COVID. We helped, it was simple lift assist on a patient. 7 days later, I got called saying that I went to a patient that died of COVID and that you need to isolate for 12 days. And I was already in day 8 of not isolating. So we were in the shit. But I will always look back and say, wow, that opened up a lot of doors. Like, now it wasn't just my friends from downtown, or we call it like the North Shore. So we have like like North Vancouver, West Vancouver, that's on the other side of our inlets, even just across the line, or in our Fraser Valley. So the heading east toward Alberta. It wasn't just those conversations and meeting at little local meetups. It was now, like, I look at your spreadsheet or your roster of people that you've interviewed or had on this show. Sorry, your guests. And I look at Mark Van Oppen. He and I've had conversations on the phone because we were going to bring him up. I've talked to Aaron Field many times and attended Nozzle Forward, and he's coming back. I've been doing a bunch of BC runs here in a little bit, which I might be going over to. Like Jared Sergi. Like, there was another guy. Like, and I went down to the States in Washington and did one of his fire service mortar class. Like, I never would have really, really gathered those people's information or known about them had we not been able to have that medium of online, Zoom, webinars, et cetera, to kind of bring us all together.
When did you start to get into instructing?
It all starts because of CrossFit and teaching 200-300 whatever people of different ethnicities, ages, et cetera. That's what spurred it. Where it delved into the fire service was that third party company and able to teach people in industry. People have no when you teach people that don't do what you do, you could screw up every single day. Like, what a great way to get your script down, get confident in your abilities to present to people. without anybody going, this idiot has no idea what he's saying. Because as a fireman, and you'll know this, I've done a lot of teaching for like informally within our own fire department, as well as our paid on call recruit classes, our career recruit classes. Generally, when you teach junior people, they want to listen. But you go and try to teach like the other 70% of your guys, unless you're buddies with them or they truly, truly respect you and they have open minds. Nobody wants to ever hear from the guy from their own department. But if Scott or Gareth go like 6 hours north or south, they're like, oh, I can't believe Scott or Gareth are visiting us. That's so cool. They must be so smart. But we don't do that internally ever. Like, and I think Aaron's talked about that too when he was on your show. Like we always want the other guy, the guy that's next door. We don't want our own guy because we don't think he knows it, because we think we go to the same calls. But I mean, we also know that like we both spent 14 years in the service. The only thing that's equal is the time. It's not what we did with it. So the instruction really started with that third-party company and just being able to teach people in industry and kind of get a different perspective on how to deliver information to people that simply didn't understand it from the beginning, which allows you then to deliver the information to people that do, because you can refine it. And every single time I have the blessing to teach somebody, I get to learn. So I always, like one of my rules is teach paid on call or teach our career recruits. I always thank them. Thank me, or I thank them for the opportunity for being able to teach them, because I'm refining it. They're getting a way better class or a way better topic, whether it's just hose line management or it's a water application, just a one-off 30-minute. They're going to send way better than the last guy that got. That guy got 27 minutes of gold and 3 minutes of shit. And I'm hoping that they only get 2 minutes, because they're allowing us to refine our vernacular, the way that we deliver. If I say or so or what too many times, every single time that they allow us to speak to them, we're getting a little bit better of an opportunity to be a better instructor and then hopefully making better students. Some opportunities just come up internally. You're able to teach our paid on call class. We used to run about 2 or 3 of them with about 20 people per. So there's a lot of eyes and ears that you're able to do. And it's set. You teach off of your lesson plans. You get to utilize what we call job performance reviews or JPRs. And you just get to go down a list very linearly and deliver that and then demonstrate. One of my most favorite parts about teaching is you demonstrate. You get to teach and then demonstrate. And then that way, not only does it give them something to look at and actually know, but it also gives you that instant clout or respect with that person saying, wow, that guy, whether he's 28 years old or 58 years old, that guy can do what he's telling me to do, which is really neat. And then, so that's kind of where it ended. And then we started getting into developing what we were talking about with search. Like you start realizing holes or vacancies within the fire service of things that we don't cover. And you start just like talking to other people, subject matter experts, like I said, like with an Aaron or Sean or yourself. You develop programs or you develop conversation. And then, so I joined what we have here. Like, are you familiar with the Fools?
Yep.
We have one called Brain City out here. It's the Fools Fraternal Order of Leatherhead Society. We have one on the Lower Mainland here. And that was another touch point or Venn diagram of subject matter experts from around the city or the municipalities. And I was able to deliver like a presentation to those guys. And that's how you become a member. You have to go to a certain amount of classes to a certain amount of meetings. And then you get to deliver a presentation to people that you, no matter what, no matter where you are, no matter what fools you go to, you feel like a fraud. Like you feel you have like
imposter syndrome.
Yeah, you will always feel like that imposter syndrome because you're speaking to people that you respect and that are there for all the right reasons. That's the hardest part, is being in those classrooms where people have already showed up. And kind of like what Fields always says, like the people that need to be here are the people that aren't here. Well, it's super intimidating because anybody that shows up wants to be there, and now you have to be on your game. And so it's kind of like the next evolution is teaching to the peers that you respect more than anybody else, but you don't work with, because those guys can just hammer you because they don't have to work with you the next day.
But the key is that I think that they don't hammer you, and the really great ones are willing to listen to the same subject content over and over and over again, because they're always looking for that next little thing. There may be 1 or 2 things that you say in that subject that I haven't heard before that I'm going to take away and I can add to what I do.
Yeah, I like that. It's true. Like they're the students of the game. And I love being around people that are students of the game. And I wasn't because I didn't have like I said, I have my mentors, like some of my best friends are even 10, 15 years older than me now on the job that we hang out. We go have like scotches with, like I did a scotch club with a bunch of boys where we made our own, whiskey. We made our own whiskeys, and they're all older than me. They're all just different paths in their life right now. And you get to sit down and you get to break bread or have a drink with them. And it's just super neat to listen to people that love it and want to be around it. But I didn't have that early on in my career. And then I started finding people that were weird like me that wanted more. And then it just takes off because like we talked about with that Venn diagram, I share something with you, you share something with me, and then you have a guy that gave you something. And I think that's how we build that culture within the fire service, not necessarily just in our own fire department. I kind of just started doing that with our own guys. Like I had a gentleman from the North Shore. All he was a live fire instructor during my recruit program at the Justice Institute. So the RBC equivalent of what you have. I met him again when I worked for this third party, and he would send me emails, just random emails about ropes and knots. And now I used to be a rope geek, and I don't do it as much anymore. I can definitely save somebody's life, but I'd rather go rescue than plan. He would send me a random email and it would be, oh, here's the tensile strength of all of these knots and these ropes. And here's what happens if like it's this kind of knot versus this. And I'm like, well, that's super nerdy, but it was cool. Like he didn't ask to send it to me. He just sent it. So that was my jumping off point for doing the same thing with my guys. I share an episode of Scott's podcast, or like you just had Corley on, share an episode of Corley's podcast. Like we brought Sean Duffy up from just on a webinar through our Rain City Fools. So I'll share the link for the Zoom and get our boys to attend. It's $10, whatever we charge, $10. And you can, if you want to have 5 guys sit in the room and watch it, yeah, like sure, whatever, $2 each. If that's how you want to manage it, like whatever. As long as it makes you feel good, I don't care. So, but I thought, like, I'm like, crap, did I tell this guy about this podcast? Did I tell this guy about this webinar that's happening? So what I did was I started creating an email list, and a blind email list, and you could go either way, but I cleared a blind email list, I think up to like 37 internal guys now, but out of 100 and something, where they all want the information. And now they just get like a random email every couple of weeks saying, hey, like here's a class. Like, yeah, like here's Jared Sergi, he's coming up. Some people respond, some people don't, but every once in a while you'll cross somebody in the fire hall and they're like, hey, thanks for sending me that. I'm like, well, why the fuck didn't you respond to my email? He's like, oh, whatever. I thought it was just like a newsletter. I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. So we use those mediums to, I guess, connect people. And I started doing that all because that one guy sent me some stupid emails about ropes and knots that didn't really matter, but he was passionate about it. And so we started building those. And then you start building a culture of guys that want to learn. And I blind CC'd it because I want them to talk to other people. Now I could have said, okay, if I let everybody know who's in it, like the 37, 38, what is always constantly growing, and I let them know, I just know that they'll talk to those guys. But if I left it blind, my theory was that they'd start talking to other people and take the risk. Say, hey, did you see that thing that Gareth sent? Or I just sent Gareth something. Because it's also, I'm hoping, and then every once in a while there's some return on investment, that I'll get a guy that sends me something. Because in the emails, I always say, send me anything. Because like I can't read all this shit. And I'll send them out like a FSRI. Like FSRI just updated their, what do they call them? Like their teaching.
The training academy courses, yeah.
Yeah, their training academy. So like all their modules are updated. And I send it out to the boys to remind them that there's going to be new stuff on there. But I also said, like, I can't possibly do them all or I'll get a divorce. And I really like my wife. Like, I think she likes me. And I like to keep it that way. But I want them to do it and send it back to me so that they now are the ones that are talking to me about it. And I think that's how we do it. I think it's super neat. And I think we never really had that now. I can't remember who it was that was talking about it. Just maybe it was Corley. Our fire service can move so rapidly and grow so fast now because of the way that we can communicate that we've never were like when I first started in the job, I never got all this information. There's no way to get it.
Hearing you talk about the guy that was nerding out on ropes and knots, what do you nerd out on? What's your wheelhouse?
I would say like Aaron Fields made it sexy to be just a blue collar fireman. It's funny because he even says like we have rope geek jerk offs. We have hazmat guys that are glowing in the dark, but we have nobody focusing on hose lines. Right. And I'm like, shit, this guy's right. Like I go and do my first nozzle forward, whatever, 6 years ago. And I'm like, wow, I was never actually told or shown how to move hose efficiently. Now it's intrinsic. Like I just had the speech with somebody the other day at the hall. I said, yeah, like Gareth goes and tells you to do a perfect V split so that I have 100 feet of line with 25-foot bites. And I can watch that go into the building as an IC or a pump operator knowing that my 50-foot coupling just hit the door. Nobody really cares about that except me, but I know it. And I also know that it took you less energy to pull that line because instead of pulling 100 feet of wet filled hose on the ground under friction and weight, you just pulled the first 25. And yeah, then it multiplies and the first 25 slowly becomes 30 feet, 40 feet, 45 feet, 50 feet. But I know that you took at least 5 to 10% less energy, less breath. Your heart rate was a little bit less. And when you come out, you can probably get back to work a little sooner. You feel a little bit better. And you also probably prevented a little bit of injury too, because you just did it a little bit better. But we can't prove that. And that's what I really like. And so I started with the hose line management. The transitional attack stuff from Fire Safety Research Institute, or FSRI, really changed my, and I'm sure hundreds and hundreds of firefighters' mentalities around this, just our area alone, about how to apply water. So I really like some of the like the water mapping stuff. But really lately, I've been on search, and I'll expand on that. So I developed a PowerPoint or a lesson plan for search, but it's not really search. You see, my department's always taught search as like an after fact. Like, and I don't know how. I don't think we're alone in this. I've been to, I don't know, probably, I don't even know, less than 100 fires, well over 50, like in residential structures. I'm not talking car fires and dumpster fires and even like multi-res. Lots of those do, but probably 50, somewhere between 50 and 114 years. And you get to make entry and you do all your stuff. But it was crazy to me that we never really prioritized search. Now, maybe that's because of like dispatch updates, arrival observations, but I always found that search was happening secondary to everything else. It was never a priority. So I started thinking about it. So I always like to look at it as a continuum. I'm at the very highest point. I want to go inside and rescue people. Okay, that's the goal. Why am I not? So I have to go all the way back to the beginning. What is the most simple reason to say that I don't? And so back with my graduate studies for disaster emergency management, we start looking a lot at risk profiling. We look at like your risk acceptance versus your risk tolerance versus whether you're risk adverse. And that always affects the decision-making of not only your incident commanders, but your firefighters. So I said, well, maybe our department, and not just our department, other departments, maybe it's the risk acceptance. Maybe it's we just don't want to take the risk because we don't know how to evaluate the risk. And if the risk is firefighters getting lost, or calling maydays, and that's why we don't want to send them in conjunction with our fire attack or pre-fire attack, maybe that's what we need to change. So how do we change risk acceptance or risk behavior? Well, we probably just need better training. And that's where I started kind of backtracking and pulling all the pieces apart. And I thought, okay, it all started with doing informal training. So I started doing informal training, and we started sitting around doing a PowerPoint on reading smoke and fire behavior, which inevitably brings up arrival observations. So we all sat around on the lazy boys at night shift reading smoke on a PowerPoint, and we all talk about what we see on arrival observations, and we all talk about cars in the driveway, time of day, playground structures, indicating there might be children, all that. And we're all in a safe, controlled environment. We're just talking about arrival observations of fire and what we think the house has, the occupants. And we're talking about time of day and whether those occupants are there. But we never talk about identifying the layout of the building. And so I thought, well, if we're not talking about the layout of the building, then how do we know where we're going? So what happened was, like, the first aha moment was we brought Sean Duffy up on a webinar, and Sean Duffy teaches searchable and survivable. It's an education in decision making. And so Sean, again, he's kind of doing the same thing. He's saying, here's the fire, and here's where it isn't. So let's start focusing on where it isn't so that we can occupy space. So we're going to focus on identifying the need to prioritize and occupy space. And we're going to utilize our knowledge of fire conditions to dictate our search actions. Totally makes sense. Sean's awesome. His PowerPoint, it was like 2 hours, his presentation is like 2 hours long. He's teaching it up to FDIC, I think, this year as well. And he taught in 2022. Awesome. But again, he's talking about what we need to do. But there's something missing from my guys, the lowest common denominator. So then I started thinking about Aaron Fields and Nozzle Ford. And he talks about flow paths, water application, reach coat seal. We're going to move down hallways. We're going to take the heat out of the building so that the heat doesn't expose the firefighters, so we are safer. And then he touches on hallways and stairwells, so directions of travel. But again, nothing from the outside. We talk about fire conditions again. Then we had Jordan Legan. So Jordan Legan, who I don't know if you're familiar with, he's part of, again, now he's now a cadre with Nozzle Ford, and Jordan is from Seattle Fire, and he does wayfinding through smoke. Jordan flips on his head, and he doesn't talk about survivable, searchable spaces in a sense, and he doesn't talk about fire dynamics. He talks about structure of the building because he has masters in architecture. What Jordan did was he started filling my gaps of the knowledge gaps or the vernacular that I was looking for. So We brought it all back down to selfishly. If I want to be in command of a fire and I want my firefighters to go in, what is the grassroots, most basic thing that these guys need to know? They need to know the layout of the building. And now we'll talk about residential structures, because that's the primary one that we find victims in. And it's also the number one type of dwelling that we lose firefighters in. Scott, do you use the Essentials Manual or IFSTA?
Well, some departments do. Where I'm at right now, they issue that as part of their reading, yes.
So out here, that's pretty much what even the third-party ones that do it, whether it's the Justice Institute or they use the Essentials Manual. So Chapter 10 in the Essentials Manual is about structural search and rescue. The only thing that the manual says, the manual that our firefighters in BC study for their 1001 level 1 and 2, it says to conduct an effective structural search, firefighters must know the layout or floor plan. And then they go on for whatever, 6 or 7 more chapters on other shit. And they never, ever go back to talking about layouts of structures. That's it. So what we found, and this is a group of myself and another gentleman, but also it's just talking and riffing around the fire hall. Why are we not teaching layouts? So how do we determine the layout? For the longest time in the fire service, identifying the layout of a structure has come from firefighters discussing it at the lazy boys or at the kitchen table saying, hey, Scott, did you know that a big bay window is probably a living room? And then you say, yeah, Gareth, and you know what? I think a frosted glass window is probably, it's usually a privacy window that's a bathroom. All right, cool. Yeah, awesome. And the big doors that roll up are garages. And we're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That makes sense. Some guys, if they want to be super smart, they're like, yeah, did you know plumbing stacks or those plastic things that stick out of the roof, they're for sinks? And you're like, yeah, probably, or washing machines or whatever. But that's kind of like as far as we go. And then we just expect that our firefighters know that what we know. And that's the problem within the fire service is we always expect people just to know what we would say is like commonalities, the common sense stuff. Again, back to the layouts. So if we're all just talking about it and we all have our own preconceived ideas of what a layout of a structure is, how do we know that when I send my 2 firefighters in, they identify that the bedrooms are the same place that I identify them in on my walk up, my 360? We don't, because we don't have any baseline for that. What I started looking at was Project Mayday and Fire Rescue Survey. We know that Project Mayday, so the culmination of Mayday events that have happened in the United States, a free register for anybody that wants to volunteer to put their data in. Project Mayday starts with telling us via NIOSH that firefighter disorientation typically precedes firefighter fatality. So my risk-adverse firefighters or officers would say, well, I can't send somebody in because I don't want them to call a Mayday. I don't want to get them lost. Fair enough. Project Mayday tells us that over 49% of Maydays are called when no 360 has been done. It tells us that 21% had a partial 360 done. So again, not really getting an idea of what's happening with that structure. We also know that about 42%, 43% of these Maydays occurred in residential structures. Again, kind of why we need to focus on residential, because another 15% of those Maydays occurred in multi-residential structures. So keeping with where people are living versus like where people are working, like a commercial structure. We now know through Project Mayday that the number one cause of firefighters calling Maydays, not death, just calling Maydays, not LODDs, was that they got lost or separated from a handline. So again, we're not getting a picture of the building because we know that the picture of the building is important. And a lot of these Maydays are being called without a picture of the building. We know a lot of these Maydays are being called in a residential structure. And we know a lot of those Maydays are being called because they're lost. Firefighters are lost or separated from a hose line. Now, the key considerations would be that we don't know if the 360 was possible, a complete one. And we also don't know if command dictated over the air that they had completed it. So let's give some fairness to the person that has called it. And we also don't know the assignments of the crews. So we don't know if those crews were assigned with a hose line or they were not. So just to give a little bit, but we go to Firefighter Rescue Survey. So the identification of victims and where victims are found, go onto their website and they'll show you that like they'll pump out stats for the first 3,000 rescues. I'm hoping 4,000 will come up anytime now because I think they were at 3,500 last year. Pumps out some stats on where we find victims, the conditions they're found in, and who's finding them. So we know, based on Fire Rescue Survey, that 67% of victims are found in low or no visibility. We also know that 90% are found with crews operating without a hose line. So, and then we also know that 63% of victims are found by the first in crew. So What we're seeing is that the same conditions that firefighters are calling maydays in are exactly the same or very similar conditions to the conditions that we're finding victims in. So what's changing? How are we losing firefighters off of hose lines in low or no visibility? But the people that are finding victims are operating in low to no visibility off of hose lines, and they're first in crews generally who don't have the advantage of, again, an additional on-scene size up, because your crews that are doing the on-scene, your officer that's doing the on-scene size up is usually in the truck, while your other crews are operating, trying to set up hose lines or hand lines, ladders, etc. They don't get cross-pollination of a crew that just went into a fire, and now you're breaking up that crew and giving it to a second in or a third in team, so you can now go in together for maybe a secondary search. So we don't get cross-pollination. We don't get over-the-air updates. And we're not really hearing a lot about our on-scene size up because we're already doing the work that's happening because we're first in. How are those people finding victims? It has to be something to do with the knowledge of the structure. I think that's super interesting. So if we can make a safer fire ground that operates more efficiently by understanding the layouts, I think that's where we need to be at. And so what we did was we put together a few steps to do that.
That's awesome. It's not making a safer fire ground because the fire ground is unsafe. That's why we're there. This is the whole thing that if you want to be safe, be good, right? The more competent and confident you are, the more you can do and be safe at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you made good points. The safety of the variables that are happening or occurring. So the fire, the potential for victims, the type of structure, the type of occupancy load or the fuel load. We're not changing that. What we're doing is we're changing our ability to operate more safely because we have a better general knowledge of what's going on, but we're not changing the dynamics of what's occurring. My biggest problem is I don't want the firefighters being the variable. We already have enough to deal with. If we can check off those boxes of those firefighters being variables, then we can now operate more efficiently on scene. Because I don't know what you know. And I just did a fire the other day in command. It was a nothing fire, a 60 by 40 shed, like 20 feet from like a fourplex. My pump operator was he's a 4-year member, but he was his very first time pumping and driving. My firefighter senior, as they call it, firefighter in the back, firefighter 1, he was in his second year, and beside him was a probationary firefighter. And we're on a quint. So there's a lot of, we didn't need the quint, or we didn't need the ladder, the capabilities, but that was the crew. And that's not unlikely for a growing department now that went from whatever it was, 64 firefighters to probably 120 now within the last 14 years, and adding an additional anywhere from 12 to 15 next year. That's going to be the norm now. And also as the baby boomer generation moves on, we're losing our largest demographic we've ever had in the fire service, and we have to replace them with people that have no experience, because you can't get experience without the job. In order to know what my firefighters are thinking, I need to kind of teach them how to think, and that's where this layout thing comes in. So what we did was we pieced together some just general facts and knowledge about how residential structures are built. We utilized some of the things from Jordan Legan's presentation because he used a lot of vernacular that really just resonated. We were struggling with finding out. We always taught people to look at the shape of the building. We always taught our firefighters, and it is more informally, on how to discuss where people live in the building and where they don't live in the building. Kind of like where they kind of congregate, but not where they sleep. We knew that we needed to identify stairwells and doors, but we also didn't really know how to explain it, because it would differ based on the person that was either, I wouldn't say teaching it, but talking about it. So through Aaron and through Sean Duffy and through Jordan Legan and some of these other experts within the field, and like Justin McWilliams of Search Culture, another one, because Justin sent me a bunch of stuff from Clackamas, and I've nerded out on that. So there's Justin teaching, like he's that final component. He's teaching how to search. Again, just like the essentials, just like Nozzle Forward, just like Search Culture, just like wayfinding through smoke, just like survivable and searchable. We've never actually talked about identifying the layout of the structure, or at least creating a baseline to do that. So what we did was we, utilizing some of these experts, kind of like my Mount Rushmore of some of these people in the fire service, we narrowed it down. So what we get, and this is a freebie because we talk about sharing information. If people want to use it, they can use it. 3 simple steps. I have, and some of my guys, and what we teach and what I teach externally now, we identify 3 things. 1, the shape of the building. And we just break it down to, is it wider than deep? Is it deeper than wide? Or is it square? We omit the things that we know. We omit the fact that we don't care about the garage because we know where the garage is. So if the garage is extended off of the house, cut the garage off, then find your shape of the building. If it's part of it and it's under, like, and you have living space above it, that's fine. It's now part of that initial compartment or that initial floor plan. So we know that it's either wider than deep. So wider than deep would be a rancher. Just something that's a single floor, maybe 2 rooms by 3 rooms. And we're talking about use of space. So when we identify uses like room by room, we talk use of space or delineation of use. We don't talk about actual physical room, because now, as you know, with modern construction, we're really just flowing all these rooms together, a lot of open concept. So when I go to a townhome, which is deeper than wide, so longer, like deeper than wide, when I walk up an alpha is in a door, and the farthest I need to walk down the spine of the building is north to south, that's deeper than wide. And we do know that typically there's not really any walls in all these modern floor plans, especially on a townhouse, but we still have 3 rooms by probably 2 rooms. It's still kitchen, living room, dining room, or dining room, living room, kitchen room. We're going to delineate by use of space. So we have wider than deep, deeper than wide, square. And we can play around with that. We're also going to omit really thinking about our floor plan with bathrooms and closets, because people don't live in them. You might have people hide in them, and those will be part of our search. But when it comes to just figuring out the layout, that's what we're trying to do. Because we already have, like I said, our robust search program should have people talking about how to search. We're talking about what we're searching in. So again, we're not talking about how to stay under a thermal layer, whether we're taking a hose line and doing a clamp slide. We're just talking about where we're clamp sliding into. So the second step, all Jordan on this one, because we were trying to figure out how do we articulate where people are. And Jordan Legan, out of his Wayfinding Through Smoke and his 4-hour presentation on architecture, we just took it to a half an hour and we said public and private. Public space is where you invite people into your home. You're having a party, Super Bowl, Toronto Maple Leafs, Game 7 Stanley Cup Final. And those are the places that you're going to invite people into. Your private spaces are where your formal occupants reside, and that's typically where no guests are. So your bedrooms. All spaces, almost all houses are based off of separating public and private. They're either going to be all upstairs or all downstairs. They're all going to be either all on the left or all on the right. And that's dictated based on step 3, identifying your exterior doors and your stairwells. We know through common practice or principles that exterior doors typically, and we're using a 90th percentile on all of this. I've had firefighters say, what about renovations? I'm like, cool, we'll find the renovations when we go in, when our interior attack or interior search team gives us a 4D picture and we give us an update. Or they come out, we cross-pollinate, probably having one search guy go with another search guy from a different truck. That's when we'll find out whether there's renovations or if you found anything weird. But if we base everything off of a percentile, like a 90th percentile, the average, then we start building that map. So the third step again, exterior doors, stairwells. We know that exterior doors typically go into public spaces. So now we've worked backwards. Now we know that as soon as we go into that door, it's probably going to be a living room, kitchen room, dining room, or a mud room. And a mud room is typically going to lead into a public space, which is probably going to be a kitchen. So now in our head, we figured that out. We know that, okay, if it has 2 floors or more, if it has a basement, we know that normally our stairwells are going to be within a certain threshold of the door, 6 to 10 feet. And we also know that those stairs are only going to follow typically 3 patterns: straight up and down, so kind of like a scissor, or a U pattern. Some sort of, that's it. Or like a straight up left and right, like a partial U. That's it. And we know that those stairs don't lead through bedrooms or into bedrooms, but we do know that they lead from public to private. And they don't go into those spaces, but they go to those spaces. So what we call it is a rapid assessment of a structure. We roll up on scene, the air brakes go, my firefighters take a peek out of the truck. They may or may not get an assignment because maybe they already know what they're supposed to be doing, just because maybe it's an initial fire attack and they're pulling a transverse 1 3/4 inch. But now what they do is they have a skill set from the front bumper to the front door to say, boom, within 15 seconds, I can determine what's the shape of the building. Is it wider than deep, deeper than wide, or square? Okay. Based on my observations on the shape of the building, where the garage is and where the front door is, where's my public and private? Are there small windows upstairs or small windows down? Are there windows on the sides of the building that are on an awkward height? Probably our stairwell. Well, now I know my stairs push everything to the left or right if they're on the left or right. If I'm going up a townhouse, and my stairs are on the left and my door is on the left, I know that every single room in my townhouse now is all pushed to the right. So those firefighters get off the truck, shape of the building, wider than deep, deeper than wide, square. Then they look at public and private. Is it up and down? Is it left or right? Boom. Now, just to confirm their bias, where are those stairs and doors? Where are the stairs leading and where are the doors leading and opening up to? And now that also helps us with our second means of egress. As the IC, and doing this multiple times over the last 3 to 4 years, now what I'm doing is I'm doing that same assessment my firefighters are. I'm directing them initially on their initial attack to say, hey guys, I want you to prioritize going to the kitchen, but we're going to do it on Charlie. If in fact I do my 360, I'm able to complete a full 360, I'm just confirming my bias now. Was I right on that initial rapid assessment? But we don't do rapid assessments. We assume that our ICs do. We assume that they have the skills. We assume that through emergency scene management 1 or emergency scene management 2, the one with the tabletops and how they figure out how to use passports like our new officers, we assume they know how to do the size up, but they're always typically sizing up the type of structure. So the 5 types of building construction, whether it's wood frame or they're assuming that we're looking for utilities, gas, electric, etc. We're assuming that they're looking at doors to see if they're opened or closed, windows are opened or closed, and conditions of the fire. But we're not assuming that they're looking at the layout for when they direct their firefighters. They're always looking at flame and flow path. Well, if we know the layout, that's certainly going to help us with our mindset on flow path. So I know it's a little bit of a rant, but if you have any questions, but yes, that's kind of what we do. Slowly been delivering that to some people locally, whether it's little seminars. We're doing a fire officer training conference coming up in the next month, just to deliver something that is simple, cheap, free. Anybody can do it. It's non-operational. It never affects Scott's or Gareth's incident command, like our plan. Nobody would know that I would do it from the truck to the door. It just makes me. But I think that by having that general layout within your mindset, you can start prioritizing back to searchable and survivable spaces.
Sure. How's it been received, and what's the uptake been?
Great so far. So no kickbacks yet. Like I said, it's non-invasive. If guys don't want to use something, they just don't use it. If they can't grasp the 3 steps, well, I think we have bigger problems. But like for instance, so I tested out a theory with a crew the other day where, and I've done it before with my own, but this is not mine, so that's why it's new. I've done it lots of times with my own people, but I was on a different shift with a different crew. 24s again, we were talking about. So because we're new to these 24-hour shift schedules, I tried something new with them, where I would normally build my training over 4 days. So 2 days and 2 nights. So now we're doing it over a day and a night. So in the morning, we do the 3 steps. We whiteboard it at coffee. We're hanging out. We're talking about, they're listening to Gareth be a nerd about wider than deep, deeper than wide, public, private. But they get it. And then I show them some practical applications. So I bring up pictures of houses within the district or the region. I get them to do a rapid assessment within 15, 20 seconds. And then at the next slide, I just show them the actual layout. So it's simply easy practice. Well, then I tell them in the afternoon at 2, 3 o'clock, we're going to go take a run we're going to check off a bunch of boxes. We're going to if our driver hasn't driven, like he's not very good in the district or the area, we're going to give him the addresses. So what I did was I pulled off addresses off of our local realtor site. So we have realty.ca. I'm pretty sure everybody does. I just zoomed into where the fire hall was. I picked the 3 or 4 closest houses that are being sold within the area. So we're talking 3 or 4 blocks away. I print off their layouts and their address. I hand the address to the operator. I take the layouts. I make 3 or 4 copies, depending on how many people are on the truck. And I have the layouts.
Interesting.
Yep. We go for a little ride in the district. I tell my pump operator, my driver, we call them pump operators, drivers, whatever. Say, here are your addresses. Take us to whatever one you want first. As soon as he pulls the air brakes, one of them gets to do a rapid assessment. It takes 15 to 20 seconds. We ask him, okay, what do you think? What do you think we have based on just this alpha or alpha bravo or alpha charlie, alpha delta size up? This is all we get. What do you think we have? He goes through his 3 steps in his head because he did it for the 15 to 20 seconds. He tells us where that stuff is. We then hand that floor plan that we've printed off for free that was available to us. And then we just confirm or deny our bias. Wow. We do it again in the next block, the next block, and the next block. And over 20 minutes, we've now achieved multiple facets of training, and we've prepared them to create like an unconscious competence or conscious competence, really, in how to assess that structure. That's it. It was all free. And the cool thing is, let's say it's the same crew and it's 3 months later, guaranteed, especially in this market, the houses are going to change. Those houses will all be gone, they'll all be sold, and there'll be a new one listings up, and we'll go back onto that website. We'll pull off 3 or 4 more houses. We'll get to see inside people's houses without ever having to go into people's houses. We never get that opportunity, and it's free.
Speaking of not having the opportunity, though, do you use medical calls, CO calls, these check calls that may not be, it's not a serious issue? Do you use those moments to do this? You're walking from outside. You can look from outside and see about even like hose stretching. You could look at layouts inside, challenges, windows.
Totally. And so I think, as you probably do, we definitely do that. I definitely do that. But we lose the formality of it. So like kind of like the layout thing. And we go back to talking about going to calls and people getting experience, and whether or not a guy noticed that or one of the firefighters noticed that there's a plumbing stack or a tiny window at the door or where the stairwell windows are. We've always left that to the informal, and we always just assume that people pay attention. So if I've gone, I think last check, I was like 5,000 calls for the career. And can I honestly say that over like the probably 2,800 medicals that I've been to, have I paid attention to every house? Probably not. But I think at the same time, we're gaining unconscious competence by moving through space. So what I want is, I don't want my firefighters to focus on the layouts, and because nerd Lockhart is with them, and he's like, oh, this guy's he's gonna quiz me on the layout when I leave the house. So he's not thinking about the medical call. He's thinking about because I think we've always done that. I think just through osmosis, our firefighters always go and move through time and space and look at things. And that's what I think that's the informal training we've been doing for decades. But we can, and I've done that before. And I've said, hey guys, like, if it's non-invasive, we're going to a lift assist. We've helped somebody back up into their chair or their bed. We don't require ambulance. We've cleared and we're walking back out. Maybe it's a good time of day just to get a visual. Those operational size ups for the next time, almost like a target hazard size up. We've done that before, where it's like, oh, hey, do you notice that this place, like, I when I was a pump operator, I used to go to the panel, and while the people when our firefighters were doing medicals with the officer, I'd pop into like a stairwell just to see if there's standpipes, just to see what my lays are going to be. Am I going to do a 2.5? Like, am I doing a 2.5 stretch like supply so they can get up to like the second floor with 1 3/4 apartment packs, or am I able to supply a standpipe? And so I think those informal size ups happen. We just need good officers and good firefighters to dictate every once in a while, instead of inside their head saying, I noticed this and I kept it in here, like the mail out list. We need to get it out our mouths to say, hey, yeah, we just went to that medical call. And do you guys notice that the front door leads up to the space, but then it also immediately leads down to the back door, like kind of like in a townhouse? So I think I don't know if we can formalize the articulation of what we see more often, but I think some of that already happens.
I think we'd be surprised how little we pay attention to things we're not consciously focusing on. You could take that from the rookie going to their first fire and they come out and they didn't even remember what the outside of the building looked like, because they were focused on their feet and their hands and the hose and the door. And calls that are not really demanding a lot of us, right? You can do some calls in your sleep, or they're not very serious, so you can go in and come out and you're not really fully conscious of what you're doing. I've just found it personally helpful to cue myself and maybe more junior firefighters to, once you're not actively engaged with the people that have called us and you're on your way out, or there's a moment, you can pause and just actively ask yourself, what am I looking at? What's around here? It's just one more benefit to running all these calls and being invited into so many people's homes as an opportunity. And it can be missed sometimes, I think, if you're just not focused on it.
Well, I think what you're describing is the difference between like a good officer and a great officer, is that and a firefighter for that matter, you have to be situationally aware, and you have to look for those opportunities, those touch points that we may not get under a time of duress. And if I nerd out again, like I think about, like, there's this something called the cognitive continuum theory of Hammond. And so what they talk about is time pressure reduces one's ability to apply your own decision rules, and that the pressure combined with other variables produce a more intuitive approach to like problem solving. So time pressure, so going to like an IDLH, like a fire, that pressure doesn't allow you necessarily to go to like the analytical. It pushes you to the intuitive. But at some point, you're also, they say that you're operating in like a quasi-rationality, and quasi-rationality is common sense. So what they're allowing you to do within that This is a paper on rapid decision making on the fire ground. It's an old paper, I think, from the 80s. They talk about quasi-rationality and intuitiveness combines in time pressure, where you don't get to use analytical. So where you're talking about, and where we kind of go back to like Maslow's theory of competence.
The unconsciously incompetent. And
yeah, and so where Maslow's theory of competence would happen is building the analytical, so that when you get into those time pressure situations, he wouldn't call it time pressure because this was based on fire grounds. You go from using your conscious competence, knowing what you know and thinking about what you know, and that's the analytical. And you're using it, like you were saying, at your medical calls, at your inspections, just your sites of interest tours where you just drive around, your formal meetings that you place. If you have like a new construction site and you want to go and walk through some of go walk through show homes. Like what a great way to get in somebody's house before they live there, before it's filled with shit. Maybe before doorways are blocked or they've made weird renovations. But that's the analytical that's allowing you, so that later on when you build that competency and essentially unconscious competency, that is now turns into quasi-rational or intuitive when that time pressure hits. Because we now know, based on some of these papers, we can't think to the analytical. We can only think to quasi or intuitive when we're under time pressure. And if we can take variables out by doing it, like you said, in a controlled environment, that'll allow us better decision making when we get to the fire ground or the medical or the medical, where so the dispatch notes came up that like I went to one that the dispatch notes came for an MVA that it was just a single car MVA into a pole. We get there and it's 3 cars, a semi-truck trailer that's hit a pole, 3 poles are sheared, and there's mineral oil from one of the transformers dripping on the car. But that car, the occupants have taken off because it was stolen, and they crashed because the police were chasing them. But it wasn't a single car MVA, right? And so I can't slow things down in that moment in the sense that I could if I went to a car dealership and looked at a Tesla Model 3 sitting there or a Mazda. I can't do that. So the only thing my decision making can do is go to my common sense or my intuition. And if I don't build intuition based off of what you were saying was like those controlled factors, then we can't get to, again, Maslow's unconscious competence.
yeah, this is falling to the level of our training.
Exactly.
We can also attach intention to it. I would have a habit of maybe looking at the presence of, or maybe even just from the size and shape and color of them, the age of smoke detectors. And is there a CO detector? So we're not there for that. But if we're in the call, why don't we check or look just in the path that we are invited to in the house to see if they are there? And if they're not, it's an opportunity to, if it's the right opportunity, to bring that up to the occupants. And now that one action, whether it's for you or for another crew, when you happen to get a fire there, maybe that family will be out because their warning systems were in place. So you can almost attach a purpose to it, right? Or if you're a hose and nozzle nerd, and then you can think about how easy would it be to move hose through this house and how many corners are there? Where would I position myself? I think when you attach a purpose and an intent to it sometimes, then that also prompts you to pay more attention.
And like kind of what we were talking about originally with we were talking about the blue collar nature of just pulling hose and how there's value, intrinsic value in moving hose more efficiently, but we can never really prove it to the haters. Someone's going to look at it and I go, I threw my attack bundle, the stuff on my shoulder, onto the ground, and I threw a couple bites. I still achieved the same thing you didn't. And you say, well, you kind of at the rudimentary or the basic level, you kind of did, but you didn't because I can't prove to you how it was different because it just is. It's the same thing. And I think what we've done with this rapid assessment, like what you want to call ideology or 3 points or 3 steps, is if we've taken the informal noticing of things like the smoke detectors, and we've just applied like a formality to it, so that we can assure that other people that we are in command of or working with, they kind of are doing the same thing. Because like I said, I can't have I essentially the whole program, and this might even help somebody that's thinking about doing something similar. The whole program was designed to identify an organizational weakness. I started with, we don't prioritize search. So how do we prioritize that? And I think if we do that with anything, whether it's fire attack, okay, well, we don't make entry fast enough. Okay, well, we don't make entry fast enough because and like it's crazy. Like I was working with people, and it's a different department, different conversations. And the guys are gonna, if when they listen to this, they're gonna make fun of me. But we were talking about transitional attack. I've got a couple in the district here in the region that call a transitional mode. And they call it as going from the outside to the inside, and you have to spray water, but that was it. And so we've had this huge argument or debate about these people that are teaching it as a mode. But then I go and talk to them about the mode, and I say, well, it's not a mode. Transitional attack is a strategy or tactic under an offensive mode. That's like basically the definition. And then that person repeats it back to me, and they say, yeah, that's exactly what it is, but it's a mode. I'm like, well, no, it's not, because if I can't determine what my firefighter is doing with that hose line, they need to know that it has to be a straight stream, that it has to be at a steep angle, it has to be held steady. They have to have a ventilation opening. That opening can't be covered by the hose stream. They then have to watch for conditions to change. Once conditions change and they're more tenable, we can now shut down that line and make immediate entry for the purposes of putting the rest of the fire out, or at least doing some sort of search, because we might have fire regrowth if we didn't see the base or the seat of the fire. But if I teach it as a mode, as I'm starting from the outside and going inside, I'm not teaching the tactic. And so when we go back to the formality of identifying how to train people, maybe it's 10 years or maybe a decade of experience or more now, or teaching other people and also being a student myself and screwing up so many times. I'm starting to realize that when we identify the problem, we have to extrapolate all the way back down to the basics, which again, when we talked about risk acceptance, why are people not sending their fire crews in immediately when they're on arrival? Is it conditions? Maybe not. Is it manpower? Perhaps. Or is it a combination of all those and their training and their knowledge, skills, and abilities to actually direct the people to do the thing that they maybe can't or haven't done? And that brought us back to the search. I have a problem with us not prioritizing search. And I don't mean every single time. I just mean when conditions dictate and we have arrival observations or dispatch notes or face-to-face with a PR or somebody that's an occupant or a neighbor, and we're getting information. I still don't want my level of risk acceptance to be dictated by my lack of experience or knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so we have to start looking at our biggest problem, our biggest gripe, because we all gripe in the fire service. What do I hate? Okay, now what's the most simple starting point? And our starting point was, I want to make guys comfortable with going into a structure. And what do I have people worried about? Well, my most risk-adverse officers or firefighters will say, I don't want to call a mayday, or I don't want my firefighters to get in trouble. Okay, well, we handed them SCBA. We handed them full turnout gear on their very first day. And we told them that shit's only used for IDLH atmospheres, because obviously even the gear now we know touching it is killing us. Well, if we gave them all this stuff to do dangerous stuff, why are we not allowing them to do dangerous stuff? Are we the ones that are dangerous because we're not experienced or trained, or knowledge, skills, and abilities are weak enough that we can't allow them to do the job they were doing? Because we are wholly compensated on our ability to do things that other people can't. And the day that we stop doing those things that the regular public can't, we're not giving them the value back. We might as well just call a bunch of high school kids when we have a fire, smack the windows open with rocks, and spray from the outside into the inside. But if we can identify that it's okay to go in, when it's okay, and how to do it to a safe degree, we can advance farther. I think a lot of the times, like firefighters and I, like just like me, we sit around the table, we complain about what we're not doing, but we don't understand why we're not doing it. And then we have to start addressing that why. And for the search part, I think it's the risk tolerance or the risk acceptance. And why is it the risk tolerance or the risk acceptance? Well, it's probably because I haven't elevated my level of risk acceptance because I don't have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do so. And so we start looking at simple things like identifying a layout of a structure so that my firefighters are less likely to call a mayday. They're more likely to follow the path the victims will be. And they're more likely also with fire attack to know the best routes of entry to put that fire out as seamlessly as possible, which isn't always alpha.
You touch on a few really good points there. And I think we need to call out the hypocrisy of having this aversity to risk and what our level of risk acceptance is, but we really don't mind the public thinking that we don't have any risk-averse feelings. we love the fact that they see us the way they see us, but behind closed doors, we maybe don't exactly live up to that. So we have to call that out, maybe sometimes harshly and pointedly when we see it. And then you talk about reverse engineering things, right? You start with a problem and you start reverse engineering it back to its simplest parts and putting it back together and building something up, and I love the way that you have walked through how you build a program, because it's very similar to how I would do it. Start with that problem, start asking a lot of questions, and then reverse engineer it. Even adding in all the things that you realize that, and this is why you can hone a program so well, because firefighters are so critical. You can think ahead of all the things that will be cut apart of your program, and ahead of them criticizing it out of respect, even just address as many of those concerns along the way, so you have the legitimate answers and ability to have the conversation. I love that you talk about making the work, even 5 to 10 to 20% easier by being competent. And I've always loved sort of tongue-in-cheek saying that I'm the laziest firefighter around, and why would I want to work harder? So I should learn these techniques to make the job as easy as possible, right? So even the laziest firefighters that exist should want to know the best way to do something, because why would you want to be on scene longer?
Well, two things. First, it's kind of funny because I always question not my people, just in general, the idea, are we there at the fire scene because it's a nuisance or it's an opportunity? That's what I really want people to start thinking about. Are we there because it's a nuisance, something that are like, shit, I see the fire, I know I have to put it out. I'm just going to put it out with water because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm going to try to mop this shit up so I can get back to the hall to do absolutely nothing again. Or am I there for an opportunity to truly do what our tenant is supposed to be, which is life, property, environment? And I find that depending on the department, depending on the individuals on the truck at that time or the engine, a lot of the times we flip-flop to property, life, environment. The property is I'm saving all the other properties that are around the shit that I just burnt down, and then I'm going to go and do a primary search while I just did overhaul. I'm not ultra aggressive in saying that I want us to make entry for search. I want us to make entry to fire attack too. This is like this presentation or PowerPoint that we deliver, this lesson plan, I guess we could say. It's not a fire attack or a search presentation. It's a layout presentation to reduce your vulnerabilities, essentially. That's what it is. Well, sorry. And one thing I wanted to not gloss over, because you made an excellent point about critiques of firefighters, because you did ask earlier about how this was received. None of this stuff works without buy-in, and you have to have people every step of the way be your critique or critique you. We have developed, and it's always like I've had awesome officers and great training officers or chiefs that would support it. You have to have a team of people behind you, of like-minded individuals that are willing to support. It's kind of like when we talk about the fire service and how your best friends will be the ones that have your back when you're not there. You need people to do the same thing for your training or your weird shit that you want to put in. Because if you don't have support, it's never going to get done. And the first day that you deliver that, you're already going to get you're going to get shit on the whole way through, and you might have the best presentation in the world, but if you do not implement it the right way, nobody's going to like it. We started with nozzle forward, or I wish I didn't have to call it that but everybody knows that's what it is. I don't want to use brand too much. I don't want to, because we're informally using it, but it's just been so life-changing for the formality and the professional side of moving hose. It's so simple, but we couldn't possibly just say, this is how every firefighter on this particular shift is going to start moving hose. It had to be informal. It had to be Lockhart and somebody else grinding it out in the parking lot, looking like dick bags, moving hose with with a clamp slide, and people are going, "What the hell is this?" Because every firefighter above us in seniority or age, now I'm older now, so it doesn't really matter. I got like tons behind me, but they're gonna look at the young guy going, "What is this idiot doing? I've been pulling hose for 30 years, looking like a dog with my head down on the ground, all fours, trying to slump away with it in one hand." That's fine. That worked for you. If you don't want those people that are critiquing your hose work or your search work to say, well, I do it the way I do it because it's the way I've always done it. And if you don't want them to get offended by thinking that you and your new shit is degrading their old shit, you got to bring them in on at least not day one, but at least week one. We have a problem within our organization or in the area where you may do a clamp slide, or you might do a V-split or a forward accordion with your attack package. So your Minuteman. And some guys do not like it. One, they haven't done it. Two, they can't do it. But the third reason, it's because they feel it degrades everything they've ever done up until that point in the fire service when it comes to pulling hose. And what they need to understand, what you need, and your responsibility as somebody who pushes the fire service forward, is to make them feel safe about those skills and let them know that they started with something, we're just improving upon it because we had the ability of time. And that's it. The wheel was never just a wheel. It started off as some caveman or dude watching a rock roll down a hill. And then they probably made it square first. And then they made it a round ball. And then they made it a round wheel. And then they made it into wood. And then eventually it was metal. And then vulcanized rubber surrounding metal. And one day it'll be like laser beams or something. But it doesn't mean that the laser beam wheel is the best and like nothing else before it was ever any use.
The evolution is what is the key, not the path along the evolution of the things.
It's all about the evolution of it and building upon the history of what came before it. And I think if we can articulate that we got to the search patterns or the rapid assessment, or we got to that clamp slide or knee walk based on the evolution that was set before us, you can bring a lot of people in and adopt that. And also if you can use them as checks and balances along the way. We did implement Minuteman. We did implement V-splits, forward accordions. We are slowly implementing. It's crazy. We do like one-man 24-foot ladders, but for up until like 6 years ago, we had these ultralight ladders with like 2-fly section. We weren't doing them formally because we just didn't have a JPR for it, and you didn't want to be the guy doing it properly behind us, like, and then get injured, and then somebody says, "We don't do that operationally. Why did you do that?" But every time that our crews or our officers or our little group or little cadre developed a new JPR, the first thing we did before it ever went formal, practice it on our own in secret. Yes, company drills. Company drills work for everything. Just figure it out there, look like idiots behind closed doors that nobody sees, screw up your V-splits, drop the ladders. Like I broke a ladder because we were trying something we saw in Chicago Fire. Because I'm like, why? Like, let's have some fun. No, it doesn't, because none of it matters. Like in the public eye, when you're at a call, that's when it matters. When you're at the scene, when you're at the hall or station, as some Americans call it, screw up. Like have a good time, build something with quality with like friends or peers that you have each other's back, vet it, and then send it to the haters, or bring one hater, then go send it to the other awesome dudes at a different hall and let them vet it. Before it ever gets formalized, it's already gone through multiple steps of critique so that by the time it's ready to be either approved or refined, you've already got 20, 30 eyes on it. Like that's how we get buy-in.
And speaking about the points of improvement throughout an evolution, a good perspective I find helpful for myself and as a conversation point with people that are the haters. We love to romanticize our generation's way. So if they're saying, well, I've been using fog nozzles my whole career and we crawl on our hands and knees, we just get in there and we put it out. It's like, well, but are you then saying that was better than bucket brigades? Like, how far back should we romanticize this? Like, why are we not, if the older is better, why don't we go back right to the very beginning and do bucket brigades again? Because somehow we got from there to here or to where you were. So why is it, and then why does the buck stop with you? Why was your generation, your level of doing things, the pinnacle of firefighting? And again, the caveat that is, sometimes we have to go ahead to think that we're improving something and realize we still need to hold on to what was older because it actually has not been improved. It still is the epitome of what should be done. So we bring that forward, right? So it's this constant deconstruction and reconstruction and keeping the best of what still is and then adding in something that's improving on it and not necessarily replacing it because it's the next bell and whistle.
Yeah, some things are just square pegs and round holes, and you're wrong. Like sometimes it just doesn't fit organizationally. Sometimes it doesn't fit within your district. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work where you are. And sometimes you need to listen to those people. You have to be. I can't be afraid that if I'm bringing in a 20-year member who maybe is like we have platoon captains, but those would be like a battalion chief in other departments. If I'm bringing him in and I need his opinion, I can't be sad that he's giving me an opinion and he's like, well, it's not really good. Like, this is not going to work. And you got to take that for what it's worth. And now that doesn't mean that you can't prep that person for ultimate success because all you want is your shit being rammed through. Like, we're all egotistical in some way or arrogant. We're going to want our stuff to get approved. And so what we need to do is set that person up for our own success by preparing them for every single nuance that they're going to come up with. But at the end of the day, if they break down all the armaments that we've put up and we've tried to push this through successfully, and they say, yeah, it's not going to work, man, then it's not going to work. So, I mean, at the same time, we need some self-awareness. We need some intellectual humility, which I think a lot of us, and it's taken me a little while, and it's probably arrogant to say that I think I have it now, but it takes time. Like, you have to have that intellectual humility to know that you don't know what you don't know, and that they might know a little bit more. At some point, we're like you said, if we're gonna ask them for their opinion, if we're asking for their history, if we're gonna ask them what's what, we're gonna have to accept the feedback. We just need to prepare ourselves and them to deliver it.
Yeah, we need to prepare them, and we also need to be prepared, because every idea we bring forward might not be the best idea. You're maybe going to bring 20 ideas ahead, and maybe 5 of them are good and 3 of them are going to make it into reality. So yeah, that awareness, I think, and that not everything that came before is wrong, even though some of the things that came before were wrong. Having a 30,000 foot view, I think, sometimes, and not getting bogged down in the details. You got to get into the weeds, like we have here, about really fine tuning and like a deconstructing. Like, there needs to be that happening, but there also needs to be the larger view. So being able to switch between those, you talk about modes, being able to switch between those two viewpoints, I think, and fluid in between them, I think that's the most beneficial approach.
Well, and I'll tell you, and that's a great point, because when I was having this debate about our operational modes, so you can do all the research in the world. I'm doing one, I'm having a problem right now with apparatus positioning on like highways. It's the same thing. You can do all the research in the world, but you have to understand what the problem is. And so we go back to like the modes. Well, we know that the Essentials Manual or the IFSTA Manual, we know FSRI, we know UL, they only really identify 2 modes of operations at a fire scene. There's offensive or defensive. Now, that is not to say that you can't transition from one to the other, because I think it might be Barron's or somebody that says that there's 4. There's offensive, there's defensive, and there's offensive to defensive, or there's defensive to offensive. Fine. We're achieving the same thing. It's either offensive or defensive. I mean, you can go move between the others. So as I'm sort of slowly pushing the fact that on our command boards, we have something called transitional. It's not a thing. I'm never going to let it be a thing. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. There's transitional attack that we need to teach our members how to have the strategies and tactics of how to apply that exact fire attack, which is listed in the manuals under a direct attack, combination attack, and a indirect attack. There's also a transitional attack
As an action of opportunity.
That's exactly. And so I'm talking to one of your supporters, or one of your gang, or in your clique, and we're chatting about it. Like, yeah, we need to understand how to do that, perform that tactic. And what the way that we do it right now isn't right, because we don't do it. We're simply just going from outside to inside. That's why it's not a mode. We need to get rid of the mode. And I had a more senior firefighter with less experience, if that makes sense, and less knowledge, skills, and abilities. Because again, with the transition of career and paid on call and age and all of this, we have a weird system within our organization where your firefighters underneath are the only one. Like, firefighters underneath all your existing officers are the firefighters that have always done every single role. So where I said that some of our firefighters got hired immediately as officers, we're going to have officers that have been officers for 20 years. But in a career service, they've never ridden the back. They've never been on probation. Doesn't mean they're bad firefighters. Some of them are the most excellent men and women and mentors and fire service personnel I've ever met. But this gentleman, we're standing in the kitchen, he says, well, Gareth, if we all understand transitional mode as the same thing, does it really matter that it's called a mode and it's not a tactic? I'm like, son of a bitch. This guy who I don't really like very much, because but he's right. And I think, and there's a value to that, because I never block anybody out. There's certain people I'm never going to ask their advice from, because I don't respect, just because they're not like decent human beings that have established themselves to be objective. But that guy made an amazing point, and I gave him credit. I told him like 6 months later, like, if we never had that conversation, now obviously I fucking won out. Like, it helped me with my battle, but I never thought about it that way. I'm like, okay, I was so focused on it not being an operational mode, because I was dedicated to wanting people to learn the tactic, that I did not think about the why. If we all understand it to be the same, is it? Now, spoiler alert, like, I went into our operational guidelines, I went into our lesson plans, and I went into our job performance reviews, or JPRs as we call them, and it doesn't exist as a mode. It never is referenced in our department at all, except for a checkbox on a command board. So we don't all understand it the same, but he made a good point. And I needed to almost like, what do they call it? Like one of those Jocko things, but basically you need to take yourself out of the situation, like you said, with a 30,000 foot view. And I needed to look at what the issue was, and like how we took everything apart on that search issue. I needed to look at the beginning and say, okay, what is the problem? Am I the problem? Am I just arrogant in the sense that I really want the strategy and tactic to perform correctly, and it doesn't really is irrelevant whether it's on the board or not? Or is it something else? And so again, you need to have that self-awareness that I didn't have at the time. And you also need to be you need to be an expert facilitator. I found that some of the biggest problems that I've had with trying to get things moving along, whether it's in my department, it's the union, it's outside, it's with my spouse, is not being a good enough facilitator. When you facilitate conversation, you need to be not in the conversation. Like Scott does today, or any other interview, you need to know when to ask the question and let the dumbass like Lockhart talk without interjecting too much. And if you have an issue, or if you want to push a Minuteman, make Minutemans on your truck, get rid of those horrible AAAs in your department, useless AAAs. You need to say, hey, gang, what do you think about Minutemen? And then you leave the conversation and you facilitate it. I need to do a better job of facilitating rather than in interjecting. And so that member taught me a valuable lesson to say that I needed to listen to him, whether I agreed with it or not, and detach myself from that and be a better facilitator.
To talk about things professionally without taking it personally.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, some of it's personal. Some of it's just being on the outside, looking in, and making sure that the conversation happens. I lost a member on a conversation like that before, where we created one of these training evolutions or these JPRs because we were formalizing some of the V splits and forward accordions. It was all done. We had went through our 30 eyes on it. We sent it to different crews. We had probationary firefighters do it step by step, because if a probationary firefighter can't do it step by step, when you read it off, because we're trying to create baselines, we can let them deviate later. They can deviate in their second, third, fourth year. They can do whatever they want on Charlie's side when I don't see them. But I'm trying to create a baseline. So if I read that to him and I'm step by stepping it and he can't perform it, I've screwed up, not him. So we went through all of our vetting. My training officer plunks it down, final copy. It's my baby. I've got a couple of my buddies there at the table who have helped us push this through. It's gone through 6 months. And the first thing this person does, he says, I see a problem already. For step 2, it says that it needs to be put on your right shoulder. So, yep, that's the attack side. It's the bundle that goes on the shoulder and the supplies on the ground. And he's like, yeah, but it can go on either side. And I said, and I made a mistake and I didn't facilitate. I got into the conversation, I interjected. And then the whole conversation for 30 minutes was just him and I arguing, and it de-evolved. And we never got anywhere. Now, yes, the JPR is fine and it's done and it was put into the system and it's well adopted. He has never bought into it because of my conversation with him. That was my fault. He hates it. He makes his firefighters put the nozzle on the right hand or the left hand side, or like we would call it the right hand side of the truck. But so everybody that goes on his truck, if he sees it, just because he wants to do it on purpose, now firefighters have the load on their left shoulder. But I didn't let him just speak it through. I interjected, and back to like our presentation, and you asked about how has it been adopted. It's adopted because I'm learning that you have to remove yourself, give the presentation or give the piece, give the top of the day, and then have that 30,000 view and just keep people on track, but don't interject. Wait for your opportunity at the end. Because if you really cared about their opinion, you would have listened to it right away, and you wouldn't have just waited for an opportunity to talk or defend. You would have seen it through. And now that guy, he'll never do it properly. So we've taught on our Minuteman, everything happens on the right. And it's because we need our most junior firefighter to know how to do it at a time of duress, when we know that he can't use his analytical side of his brain, he can only use his intuitive side, that when he takes it off the truck, it's on his right shoulder. And then the bundle hits his right hip. He looks over his right shoulder when he's leaving the truck so that everything's paid out. When he grabs the nozzle, it's on his right hand, so that he puts his right hand to his right foot to perform a split V. Then when he goes and picks up the bites and walks them backwards or forwards, whichever direction he's going, he looks over his right shoulder because the right hand is holding the nozzle piece, and it's the shortest piece of hose possible, and that's the first one that's going to stretch tight. He's going to drop that one first, and then he's going to walk back, and he might grab a bite or a coupling at the 50-foot mark with his right hand and bring it up to the hose. But if it's on the left-hand side of the truck or on his left shoulder, everything's been thrown out the window. I don't want to create him as a variable. He's supposed to be, he or she, is supposed to be consistent. And that's what they're there for day one, is consistency. Much like we put all of our FR equipment in the same bin, Our apartment packs are in the same bin. The hydrant bag is in the same bin on every single truck. Uniformity and continuity, so that at 3:00 in the morning, under states of duress, when we cannot think anything other than intuitively, we can go back to that. But I lost one member because I couldn't facilitate conversation.
Which then, with the analogy of the apple, right, you can spoil the bunch. Even if it doesn't change and derail the entire intention of the program, it can sway some people, and it makes it more difficult. I've
found that over the almost 15 years now, if we want to implement our own designs, if we have a bias, if we have something that we want to see being performed operationally, organizationally, we have to have an idea. The idea has to be addressed with a why. We have to de-evolve that idea down to the most fundamental or lowest common denominator of what the problem is, and we have to start solving it from there. We can't be by ourselves. We have to have buy-in. We have to have a team behind us, and we have to be willing to share the work and the credit to make sure that everybody that's involved is truly involved. We have to give back to those people to let them have the opportunities to also see out their baby. Because the worst thing, I'm on the executive and I've written reports to council, but the worst part about it is sometimes you give it to somebody else, and you never get to see your baby across the line, and you don't feel fulfilled. So you do 97% of the work, the 3% gets done behind the scenes, but everything that the work was, or the success or failure was based off of, was the 97%. The 3% was putting in an envelope, or going and handing it. People feel disenfranchised or devalued. They don't want to put effort in if, again, we don't let them see their products or their baby across the line. So we got to do that. And you have to find the haters. I know sometimes it sucks, but if you bring at least one of them in, you're going to get stuff you don't want to hear, but they might have something that you should have heard.
That's a great point to finish up on. How do people reach out to you just to chat with you, or ask about, or get involved with receiving your program?
My Instagram is just private. It's just family stuff. But they can do my name and my first and last name at gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't check it often, but I get push notifications, so they can do that. And that's probably the best way. We can do that. And then one of the things we've done that you and I didn't touch on too much, but we are known in our area for political action. I've retired from that now. I don't do that anymore. But if it's a local or an organization, so an IAFF local or an organization, paid on call, volunteer, and they're finding that they're struggling with support at a local government level. So in Canada, for any US listeners, that's our mayor and council, because we are almost wholly funded by municipal funding. So you're basically property taxes, and you're finding that your department isn't getting the reach that they need. That's where our expertise has been. And that's where I was in 12 years. 12 years of my 14 or 15 years. Super boring, not good enough for a podcast, unless we go on a political one. If they need anything for that, I still, that knowledge will never leave. And we've done a lot of consulting behind the scenes, because unfortunately it's still very operational and organizational, because we have the IAFF and there's provincial bodies that don't spend a lot of time at the municipal level right now. So if they need any of that information on how to build a good system just to get a piece of the table, or a piece like a seat at the table for conversation, we can do that too. But anything. So we have the search stuff, just how to implement training, how to just get some buy-in, because I've been on the bad side of buy-in and the good side. I've been the arrogant one, and I've also had to have the humbleness here and there. I'd like people to learn from my mistakes and successes, just so they don't have to do it and it's not repeatable. Email or that LinkedIn. But like I said, I'm not on it, but I'll definitely get the notifications.
Perfect. I'm glad we finally were able to make this happen.
No, it's great. And I appreciate that. When I said, I look at your roster, I look at the guests. There's a couple from the region here that are peers. And I look at some of the people that you've talked to that have inspired me. And it just takes one. It just takes one person listening to it and contacting and implementing something in their own department. And I really, really value your time, the opportunity. This is how we grow the fire service. We're losing a lot of members out of this fire service now through retirement. We had our biggest generation ever. We're slowly replacing them with a group that will have no experience. And I think that there's a gap, or there's a good group in the middle here that can drive that change for the next generation. It's awesome. What you have is a great conduit to grow that. And I just appreciate the opportunity.
Cool. It means a lot.
Okay. Thanks, Scott.